you, Deputy Mayor. Just so we're just on capital, so I just want to, I guess, go to Director Walsh. Came up a couple weeks ago. We did talk about Ironmen Field, and I've been a few calls in that sense. So I know that was a 5 year. 5 years ago, I think the study came out that we did on the polls, that the polls are be no good in 5 years. And we've heard earlier that, 5-year plans have to be renewed, obviously. So just where are we in that? And do we have time in next year's budget, where they are going to be hosting nationals? Like, just give us a breakdown of what you think is going to, or where we are.
Sure. To follow up on that, with some discussions that I have had with the engineering department, it would be expected that 2026 might not be a good year to be able to do those polls, due to we don't want to get into making some changes on the lights and then tearing up the infields and grass infields and sod in the area to try to install. Plus, we have had some delays in the lighting for MVHS and delivery, so we don't want to get into a situation where that could happen. If that did happen, we may need to look at doing daytime game. It depends on right now, currently we could still use the lights, but if something were to happen, we might end up having to move to a different field. I think that may answer your question on timeline anyway.
Yeah, that's something I guess we didn't discuss, just the timeline. It has been announced that nationals will be coming in a year and a half or 2 years, whatever you want to call it. And obviously we don't see anything happen this coming summer, either that field. So, I don't, around the table, I'm not sure what everyone feels, but I do feel that if we are going to hold a national event here, we got to have national standards, I guess, and we got to show it off. If we're going to show our city off, it's a pretty easy way to show it, right? When you have hundreds or thousands of people at a ball field for definitely a week, and I know it's only a week, but there's a lot of things we do that only promote weekends and stuff too. So in our budget, so really at this, I guess we got to talk about it. So I'd put a motion on the field that we move Ironmen Park to this year's general capital budget.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harris. So we do have a motion on the table concerning the lights at Ironmen Field from Councillor Harris. Anyone to second said motion? Councillor King. So now we'll open for discussion. Councillor DePlacy.
Just a point of information, is the current setup, does that miss what's needed of a national tournament that was just referenced, Director?
Through Chair to Councillor DePlacy, as the polls currently sit, they would meet standard, as my knowledge. They would meet the standard as now. Some of the biggest issues would be the polls, but as now they sit up there right now in position. Haven't had a chance to do readings on them, but I would expect that they would meet the standards of a national tournament.
Councillor Ross Robinson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
You're welcome.
How much do lights cost with poles?
Through the Chair to Councillor Ross Robinson, you can see in the capital budget form that the expected cost of the replacement of the poles and the lights, I believe, is about $700,000. We do, if this was to go through, I do expect there would be some funding available through RDC to the tune of 40%.
Thank you. So where do you propose that we get the money to pay for this? From what I understand, our budget's pretty tight. I played ball once upon a time, and I find it hard to believe that a group wouldn't get the bid to host nationals if their equipment wasn't in good enough condition to be the host. So it would be my mind that this can wait until the time it was prescribed to be done. So I would like to know where, Councillor, you propose to get the money to do this. Does this mean that you're proposing that something be cut?
Yeah, I think we'd have to look at it, Councillor Ross Robinson, but at the end of the day, the plan was done from a 5-year study that was done by the council, and the 5-year study said the polls would be, kaput, I guess you might as well put it, at the end of 5 years. So that's where we're standing. And the only thing I'm looking at, just from the director, if we do get this, the polls now are up to national standards, but if something happens, what's the timeline for us to get poles and lights in that field? Because right now, we are told from the study that was done, and everyone likes studies around this table, that the pole life was 5 years. So that's really my question. Where we get the money, yeah, there is opportunities in this budget to cut. As council, we haven't really cut anything yet. So there is opportunities.
Your Worship, Mayor Lorden.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor Quinn. I guess I'd just be curious. I think Councillor Ross Robinson touched on one of my questions I would have is so what would we propose to remove and to include this? I mean, we'd love to do this. I'd love to do lots of the projects on our list that didn't make it in. Also, I don't recall really the study that Councillor Harris is referencing. I don't know if that could be recirculated to us. And also, I guess maybe to Director Walsh or whoever could answer, but I guess the Nationals take place in the peak of summer, really, I believe. But I guess in the incidents that the lights, for some reason, we didn't do it this year. Could you do them in 26 before the event, or what would happen if for some reason the lights weren't working? Like, it's peak summer. We have a lot of light at that time. I guess, maybe I'd love to specifically hear what you think the impact would be on the event if we didn't have the lights. And I guess maybe a little bit more of an explanation as to why it couldn't happen in 26, either before or after the event.
Thank you, Mayor Lorden. Director Walsh.
I will get engineering maybe to kind of, Mark, if,
Okay.
if he doesn't mind commenting on the issues with 2026 trying to do the work, but I can comment, in regards to 2026, the condition of the poles as is, they're usable. We did have a report, a 5-year report that was done, a condition assessment that was done on the poles, which recommended that poles be replaced within 5 years. Since then, we haven't done any assessments since then. They're still standing. They haven't, there have been some deterioration. It's hard to be able to, we'd have to get somebody to take a look exactly what it is. But the consequence of it would be, depending on what happens to the poles right now, we can't really predict if they'll still be standing in 2026. They could and they might not be. So the consequence of them going down would limit the amount of hours that you'd be able to play, and we might need to use some of our other fields to accommodate nighttime games. That would be the consequence, but maybe I'll let Mark answer about the 2026 project.
Thank you, Director Walsh. Yeah, my fear for delaying the project to 2026 would be reinstatement of the field. In order to confirm that you would have the standards that are there today, leaving it to the last summer could cause possible delays. There would be a very large rush to get the landscaping to have the high quality that you'd want for the baseball field. And with the current situation at MVHS, we had the project tendered earlier this year, and we have poles standing with no lights, which would be another fear of mine, that the lead time can change. These things go up and down every year since COVID. We're not entirely sure, but right now we're waiting months, not weeks, for lights. So that would be my fear for waiting to 2026.
Okay, Director Buckingham, if I may, from the chair here this evening, I'd be no shock that I would weigh in on this one, and I missed the first opportunity while I was away. Taking the Nationals out of the equation, if you'll allow me a little room to maneuver here. I look at this at a few angles. Obviously, we want to put our best foot forward for the upcoming Nationals in August of 2026. But it's my understanding, and it's been referenced here a few times, we do have a report that it was on a 5-year cycle, so now we're into a safety concern, perhaps. We get well-educated on asset management from a recreation point. We want our fields to be in great repair. From an engineering standpoint, John Street's being done. It just seems like the right time, perhaps, while we're tearing up that corridor, to do it all at once. And, we have safety officers. We're going to rely on our staff, the staff of summer students who are working on poles that evidently may or may not. And I'm a little lost on this one. I do agree with Councillor Ross Robinson and Councillor Harris where the money comes from, to be determined, but it just seems like this would be the right time to do this. And I'll leave it at that from various angles. And, of course, referencing someone, Director McTavish, presented us a presentation here tonight on sports tourism, and we're setting money aside for that, and this is a key component of that as far as I can see from where I sit here this evening. Councillor Summers?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess just like you alluded to, no surprise that I would want to chime in on this as well. And I think I will focus. I know we're not putting all our eggs in one basket with one event, but I do think the onus on hosting the Nationals as effectively as we have the last number of times that's been here, the last 2 times for sure, is imperative that we do everything we can. And I understand 100% where Councillor Ross Robinson's coming from, because looking at my list here in front of me, I'm not sure where that money's coming from just yet, neither. And I guess Deputy Mayor just alluded to that as well. But, I mean, in terms of the event itself, there's not one community in the country that comes close to hosting the men's senior nationals, like the community of Miramichi, or more specifically, over in Chatham on the Ironmen field, and in Chatham Head too. I shouldn't leave them out, because they're a big part of that event as well. But the crowds and the atmosphere that are provided here in Miramichi blow the rest of the country out of the water in terms of, the players from all across the country tell us that, or tell the fans, tell the other players, et cetera. And I don't need to belabor it too long. It's a huge event for our city, not just because I'm a baseball guy, but because it basically puts us on the national map for a month, for that particular week. And to my knowledge, there are no other cities in the country that get asked to host this event every 3 to 4 years. So it's a big capital investment, sure, but it's not, to me, a one-time, I think our lights last, we said, approximately 40 years. So in my mind, hypothetically, we end up hosting this event 10 more times. It's not, let's get it done for 2026 specifically. I guess I'm contradicting myself a bit, but to me, it's a long-term investment, and I think you can see that I'm all on board, and hopefully I can figure out where we're getting the money for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. If I may, I guess I'll direct this one to you, Manager Noel. Again, outside of the scope of hosting a Nationals, I'm just looking at Ironman Field, considering it an island, let's call. If we have a report that says our poles within 5 years needed to be replaced, and something did happen, are we into a liability situation there, or I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, but like if we knew if we knew the condition was pre-existing, what happens then?
We put it, if the pole fell and it fell on a person, yes, there's a liability issue.
Mm-hmm.
If the pole falls, outside of playing field or playing use, no, it wouldn't be a liability issue. Okay. The only thing I can add is there was, I can describe the discussion that took place on this issue at asset management, and there was quite a bit of discussion, and what it came down to was, the asset management principles don't let you currently weigh in things like the national tournament and its consequences.
Fair.
And when you're trying to weigh plow trucks and how many people that would affect if you didn't have it and a national tournament, in spite of the long conversation, the belief was if we lost them close to it, that we need a second lit field, and Memorial would be an alternative field, and it would not be ideal. But it's not because it wasn't recognized that these have to be replaced sometime soon. There's probably everything on that list is probably in asset management would be classed poor or worse. And so that's how it happened. It wasn't a recognition is that if you stick to the principles, you're saying how many people would this impact? And it was the numbers, I think, at the end of the day that we said we couldn't advise council to put it in this year's capital list. But I just want you to understand it was quite a discussion because it wasn't done in isolation of the Nationals. But if you're sticking to principles, having a national tournament did not allow us to move this up. So to your point of isolating that, yeah, we isolated the tournament away from consideration.
Okay, I appreciate hearing that. That's very fair. Any other comments? Councillor King?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just on the poles itself, if I may, if we happen to replace them, are we putting the cement poles in or the wooden ones back in again? The creosote ones, whatever.
Through the chair to Councillor King, Director Walsh can correct me if I'm wrong, but we would be replacing them with wooden poles.
Wooden poles? It wouldn't go like the ones I have up in Miramichi Park here, Memorial Field?
Director Walsh can follow up after, but back to Councillor King, there are some constraints with underground servicing, the grandstands and whatnot. Director Walsh, if you want to touch bit for that.
Yeah, to follow up, Councillor King, is the galvanized poles that are placed at Memorial Field during construction. It was the space of the footprint of the base of those poles would be of concern at Ironmen Park, based on where some of those light pole stanchions would be expected to be. They are in close proximity of water lines on John Street. So if we have a significant size base, there could be significant increases in cost, and also would probably affect some of the water system going in through there. So we're trying to minimize the effects on any of that, as well as some of the bleachers were built around the current existing wooden poles with cement pads. So there would be a significant cost if we were to switch that into the galvanized side.
Okay, very good. Councillor Arsenault has joined us again. I just noticed you buzzed in. Your Worship, Mayor Lorden.
I guess question, like a point of order or a point of information is, I know in a moment you'll have to call the question, Deputy Mayor Quinn, on Councillor Harris's motion here to amend, but right now the motion is only to add something into the budget without taking anything out. So my question, I guess, is maybe to the manager or the clerk, but if council would pass this motion without identifying what might be cut to add this in, are we then implying a tax increase? Just because, again, there are lots of things on this list, including these lights, that I'd love to do this year, but it's also about priorities, and, my vote will probably be determined on what you propose we take out. Or if it's a tax increase. So I guess I'm just looking for some guidance in, how procedurally the other side of this circle gets squared.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I see Councillor Harris's hand is up here. Firstly, Director Gorman, do you have an answer to His Worship's question to this point?
Through the Deputy Mayor Quinn, yes, that would be correct. We would have to remove a project, or it could increase the tax rate to an equivalent amount to offset the cost of the project.
Yeah, so a project or projects to the value of. Correct. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, just to Director Gorman, I know last week after a conversation, we still have quite a bit of room in borrowing, and we're not borrowing the 1.3 for the truck this year. That was brought up last week. That's just put there as a number. But we could borrow the $420,000 and not affect the tax rate, just by figures that when you do it up quickly, because we're not paying the full $420 when we borrow. We're going to be paying the payments on the $420. So I don't think that would affect the tax rate, but maybe you could let me know that.
Councillor Harris, it wouldn't affect the tax rate, but, I understood, and I thought we were committed to allocating one reserve solely to multiplex or emergencies, and we're near our borrowing capacity. And again, multiplex is eating a good portion of that up. And we did reduce the amount we were borrowing for the Eco Center roof, but we picked up the difference under the Kerr Park stormwater system. So we actually are still borrowing the same amount that we felt was, capacity, or the highest amount we would like to borrow for the year 2025.
Okay. And I really, at the end of the day, I can renege my motion, but at the end of the day, I just want to make sure with this, with the 5-year that came out last week that I knew nothing about from Director Walsh, that if there is an issue with the lights in 2026, and one does fall down, that the group that applied to host nationals understand the nationals at the daytime will be at Ironman Field, but at nighttime would be at Tiger Field or Cardinal Field. And I think, I think the people that, Memorial or whatever, it's Scaria. So at the end of the day, it's just make sure the organizers know what the plan is, because we could be sitting here in 6 months' time and a poll could come down this winter, and it will not be in a budget. It's going to be coming out of reserve. And, if that's what council decides that night, and that's why we have to realize sometimes when we take stuff back and forth. But borrowing it, I don't think you would be raising your tax rate, because there is other things within utilities and general operating. I think we could find some dollars with some over expenditures for sure. But you know, with the will of council, I guess tonight, we have to put it on the floor, and that's why the motion had to be made, but, you know, we got to make sure we're upfront with the people the volunteers that applied to host this event, so.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Prior to that, Councillor Ross Robinson, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you,
You're welcome.
Deputy Mayor. Director Gorman, I might be putting you on the spot, but could you share with me what the impact of 1 cent is?
Uh, 1 cent equates to $212,099.47.
Okay, Councillor Placey, excuse me.
Just, thank you for the patience. To the point of, like, 5 years ago, we were able to commission a study or an assessment to determine that 5 years, through, you know, that they'll be in a certain state. What would be the mechanism for us to confirm that this is the situation this year, that, you know, within 12 months there is a risk? Like, what does that cost to have those, you know, come, I don't know, within 3 weeks, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months, to have a look at them and reconfirm the safety and some of the hypotheticals that we're working under, I guess?
Through the chair to Councillor Duplessis, we would have the same consultant come back and do another inspection. I would have to investigate on what the initial inspection cost. This wouldn't, well, it'd probably be similar scope, so I would have to look into that, and I'd get back to you on that.
Just the point I would make is it would be good to have that information kind of leading up to this, but we don't. And again, if it comes back, if that can be done, depending on the cost and where that money would come from, I'm not positioning it to be a budget item at this point. But you know, if it would come back and say, yes, this is an emergency, that's why we do have reserves, and I know the reserves are tapped, but that would qualify as an emergency. And if it comes back with the state, you know, of an emergency situation, then we'd respond accordingly. If it, you know, but at this point, I wouldn't be supporting something that is not necessarily deemed an emergency with this budget as it currently stands.
Very good, Councillor Duplessis. Your Worship, your hand is up again. To you?
Yeah, just building on what Councillor Duplessis is saying. Like, I do believe we just heard Director Walsh say a couple of minutes ago that there hasn't been a recent assessment done on the polls, and I think that I would agree with Councillor Duplessis. Like, and typically those kinds of assessments are operational and they're not huge expenses. So I would support getting a new assessment as soon as we could, and ideally before we put this budget to bed. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but you know, look, the reality is, guys, like all things, we have more that we need to fix and do and grow than we have funds available. In particular with the multiplex, and you know, not getting the full funding partnership there, but in general and on all things. That's why we're urgently calling for fiscal reform too. There is more to do than we can do, and you know, nobody wants to put this into a bad position for hosting a national event, especially one, as Councillor Summers pointed out, that we host regularly and do a very good job of hosting. You know, I'd just love to have a condition assessment to give us up-to-the-minute information, because maybe this will say they've held up better than we thought, and you're definitely going to get 2 more years out of them. You know, and the safety risk could be said of also anything else that we don't do this year either. So, you know, I'd love to just have a bit more information if possible, but it's tough to sort of see what you're, you know, how it fits in the short term without updated information, I guess, from my perspective.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, I would, you know, at this time, I mean, I agree with Councillor Duplessis and Mayor Lorden, I guess, that, you know, if we can get some more information, you know, if Councillor King would agree, I would table it until we get not to hold up the budget process, but table it on this project until we get some information back, because after last week's, the 5-year studying coming up, you know, I was a little concerned where we were going with this. So if Councillor King would second the motion to table it, it'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion is now that, as Councillor Harris presented, Councillor King is in the affirmative. We do call a vote on that? Yes? motion to table. Sorry, yes, sorry if I wasn't clear with you. Motion to table, yes. Okay. So all those in favor of the motion to table proposed by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor King, all in favor? Aye. To the contrary? And seeing none, that is carried. So